I never planned on being called Elmwood's miracle worker, but life has a funny way of leading you exactly where you're meant to be. The day I hung that shiny new sign outside my rehabilitation center, I had no idea how much it would change not just my life, but the lives of so many others in this sleepy Texas town. The August heat shimmered off the pavement as I stood back to admire my handiwork. Allison Greene, physical therapist, gleamed in gold letters against a crisp white background. It was official. My dream was now a reality. Well, if that ain't the prettiest sight I've seen all day. A familiar voice drawled behind me. I turned to see Tanya, my best friend since kindergarten, sauntering up the sidewalk with two large iced teas in hand. "You're just saying that because you designed it," I teased, gratefully accepting the frosty drink. Tanya's eyes crinkled as she grinned. "Maybe so, but it don't make it any less true. You did it, Allie. You're gonna change lives in this town." I took a long sip, letting the sweet tea cool me from the inside out. "That's the plan," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Now I just need some patience to show up." "Oh, they'll come," Tanya assured me, linking her arm through mine as we headed inside. "Word travels fast in Elmwood. Half the town already knows about your fancy new techniques from the big city." I laughed, but there was a flutter of nerves in my stomach. It had been a risk, coming back to my hometown after years of training in Houston. But when I heard that old Doc Miller was retiring and leaving Elmwood without a physical therapist, I knew it was my chance to make a real difference. The bell above the door chimed as we stepped into the blessedly cool air conditioning. I surveyed the reception area, with its soothing blue walls and comfortable chairs. Beyond that was my treatment room, filled with state-of-the-art equipment that had cost me a small fortune. Tanya whistled low. "This place is something else, Allie. You've come a long way from wrapping sprained ankles on the high school football field." I smiled, remembering those simpler days. "Speaking of which, how's your brother doing? Has he been keeping up with his exercises?" Tanya rolled her eyes. "About as well as you'd expect from a stubborn mule like him, but don't you worry, I'll drag him in here if I have to." We chatted for a while longer before Tanya had to leave for her shift at the diner. As I watched her go, I felt a pang of loneliness. It had been wonderful reconnecting with old friends since moving back, but there was still an ache in my chest that even the warmth of small-town hospitality couldn't quite fill. My phone buzzed, and I smiled when I saw Mark's name on the screen. My boyfriend of 2 years was still back in Houston, finishing up his residency. We were trying to make the long-distance thing work, but some days it felt like we were drifting further apart instead of closer together. "Hey there, city boy," I answered, trying to inject some cheerfulness into my voice. "Hey yourself, country girl," Mark replied. "How's the grand opening going?" I filled him in on the day's events, my enthusiasm growing as I described my plans for the center. Mark listened patiently, but I could hear the distraction in his voice. "That's great, Allie," he said when I finished. "Listen, I hate to cut this short, but I've got rounds in 5 minutes. We'll talk soon, okay?" "Okay," I said, trying not to let my disappointment show. "I love you." There was a brief pause before he responded. "Love you too. Bye." As I hung up, I pushed aside the nagging doubts that had been growing over the past few months. Mark and I had a good thing going. We just needed to get through this temporary separation. Once he finished his residency, we'd figure out the next step together. The rest of the day passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. By the time I locked up that evening, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of Elmwood, a sense of purpose filled me. Tomorrow, I'd start making a real difference in people's lives. I had no idea then how much my own life was about to change. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and I arrived at the center early, fueled by a mixture of nerves and excitement. I'd barely unlocked the door when I heard the rumble of an approaching truck. A beat-up Ford pulled into the parking lot, and out stepped the last person I expected to see. Mitch Hawkins, former high school football star and notorious heartbreaker, limped towards me with a scowl that could curdle milk. "Morning, Allison," he grunted, not quite meeting my eyes. "Heard you might be able to help with this bum knee of mine?" I blinked in surprise, my professional demeanor kicking in to mask my shock. Mitch had been the golden boy of Elmwood High, destined for NFL glory until a catastrophic injury in his senior year derailed everything. Last I'd heard, he'd taken over his family's ranch and become something of a recluse. "Of course," I said, holding the door open. "Come on in and we'll take a look." As Mitch followed me inside, I couldn't help but notice how different he seemed from the cocky teenager I remembered. His shoulders were hunched, and there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of more than just physical pain. I led him to the treatment room and had him sit on the exam table. "So, tell me what's been going on with your knee." Mitch's jaw clenched as he described the constant ache, the way it gave out unexpectedly, the limitations it put on his daily life. As I listened and began my examination, I could feel the frustration radiating off him in waves. "Have you had any treatment since the initial surgery?" I asked, gently manipulating his knee. He shook his head. "Tried physical therapy for a while after it happened, but it hurt like hell and didn't seem to be doing much good. Figured I'd just have to live with it." I frowned, noting the lack of flexibility and the way he flinched at certain movements. "Mitch, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You've got a lot of work ahead of you if you want to regain full function. But I believe we can make significant improvements with the right treatment plan." He looked at me skeptically. "No offense, Allison, but I've heard that before. What makes you think you can fix what a bunch of fancy doctors in Houston couldn't?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because I'm not just going to treat your knee, I'm going to treat you. The whole person. And because I'm more stubborn than you are, Mitch Hawkins, I won't let you give up on yourself." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Then he looked away, his expression hardening. "We'll see about that." As I began to outline a treatment plan, I realized that Mitch Hawkins might just be my biggest challenge yet. But I was determined to help him, not just for his sake, but to prove to myself and the whole town that I could make a real difference here in Elmwood. Little did I know, Mitch's case would push me to my limits, both professionally and personally, in ways I never could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, a steady stream of patients began to find their way to my door. There was Mrs. Johnson, recovering from a hip replacement, little Tommy Parker, learning to walk again after a car accident, and a dozen others with various aches, pains, and limitations. But it was Mitch who consumed most of my mental energy. He showed up for his appointments like clockwork, grimacing through the exercises and manual therapy with grim determination. Yet for every step forward we took, it seemed like we slid 2 steps back. "I don't get it," I muttered to myself one evening, poring over Mitch's file long after I should have gone home. "We're doing everything right, but it's like his body is fighting against the treatment." A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. I looked up to see Mark leaning against the doorframe, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and a tired smile on his face. "Surprise," he said, holding out the flowers. "I managed to swap a few shifts to get a long weekend off. Thought I'd come see this empire you're building." I jumped up and threw my arms around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "I can't believe you're here. Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Mark chuckled, returning the hug. "And missed the look on your face?" "Not a chance." As we pulled apart, I saw his gaze land on the open file on my desk. "Working late again?" "You know, when I pictured you moving back to small-town Texas, I thought you'd have more time to relax, not less." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know. It's just, there's this one patient I can't seem to crack. I feel like I'm missing something important." Mark's brow furrowed. "Hey, don't be so hard on yourself. You can't win them all, Allie. Sometimes people just don't respond to treatment the way we hope they will." I shook my head, frustrated. "But that's just it. I know he can improve. I've seen flashes of progress. It's like there's something holding him back and I can't figure out what it is." "Well," Mark said, gently closing the file, "how about you take a break from trying to solve the mystery and let me take you to dinner? I'm only here for a few days, after all." I hesitated, glancing back at the pile of work on my desk. Then I looked at Mark's hopeful expression and felt a pang of guilt. He'd come all this way to see me, and here I was, obsessing over a difficult case. "You're right," I said, forcing a smile. "Let me just grab my purse." As we walked to the local steakhouse, hand in hand, I tried to focus on Mark and push thoughts of work aside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, something that could make all the difference for Mitch and, by extension, for my fledgling practice. The next morning, I arrived at the center early, determined to approach Mitch's treatment with fresh eyes. I was reviewing his file one more time when I heard the familiar sound of his truck pulling into the lot. Mitch limped in, his face set in its usual scowl. But today, there was something different about his demeanor. A tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of more than just physical discomfort. "Everything okay?" I asked as he settled onto the treatment table. He grunted noncommittally. "Just peachy. Can we get on with it?" I began the session, guiding him through the usual stretches and exercises. But my mind was whirring, picking up on 100 tiny details I'd overlooked before. The way he held himself, the flicker of fear in his eyes when I asked him to try a new movement, the defensiveness in his voice when I prodded him about his at-home exercises. Suddenly, it hit me like a thunderbolt. I'd been so focused on the physical aspects of Mitch's injury that I'd completely missed the mental and emotional components. "Mitch," I said softly, "I need you to be honest with me. When you're doing your exercises at home, are you stopping as soon as you feel any discomfort?" He looked away, jaw clenching. "What's your point?" "My point is that some discomfort is normal, even necessary, for progress. But I think you're so afraid of re-injuring yourself that you're not pushing hard enough to make real improvements." Mitch's head snapped up, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think I'm not trying hard enough? You have no idea what this is like, Allison. No idea what it feels like to have your whole future ripped away in an instant." I held his gaze steadily. "You're right. I don't know exactly how that feels. But I do know what it's like to be afraid. To play it safe because you're terrified of getting hurt again." Something in my voice must have reached him because his anger seemed to deflate, leaving behind a vulnerability I'd never seen in him before. "I can't go through that again," he said quietly. "The pain, the surgeries, the months of rehab, only to end up right back where I started. I just can't." I laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Mitch, I can't promise you'll never feel pain again. But I can promise that if we work together, really work, not just go through the motions, you can get better. You can have a life that isn't defined by this injury." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see the battle playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay, let's do this. For real this time." That conversation marked a turning point, not just for Mitch, but for me as well. I realized that to truly help my patients, I needed to treat the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. It wasn't enough to just focus on the physical aspects of rehabilitation. I had to address the fears, the doubts, and the emotional baggage that often accompanied injury and illness. Over the next few months, I threw myself into developing a more holistic approach to treatment. I researched mindfulness techniques, incorporated elements of cognitive behavioral therapy into my sessions, and even brought in a local yoga instructor to teach gentle classes for my patients. The results were remarkable. Mitch, true to his word, attacked his rehabilitation with newfound determination. There were still setbacks and moments of frustration, but slowly, surely, he began to improve. The day he walked into my office without a noticeable limp, the smile on his face was brighter than the Texas sun. Word of my success spread through Elmwood like wildfire. Soon, I had a waiting list of patients eager to try my miracle treatments. The center was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. But as my professional life soared, my personal life began to falter. Mark's visits became less frequent, our phone calls shorter and more strained. We were both so busy with our careers that it became easy to let the distance between us grow. One crisp autumn evening, as I was locking up the center, I saw Mitch's truck pull into the lot. He hopped out. Actually hopped, with no sign of the limp that had plagued him for so long. and strode towards me with purpose. "Allison," he said, a nervous energy about him that I'd never seen before. "I need to talk to you." "Of course," I replied, curiosity piqued. "Is everything okay? Your knee's not giving you trouble again, is it?" He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, my knee's fine. Better than fine, actually. That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about." Mitch took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something. "Allison, you didn't just fix my knee. You gave me my life back. You made me believe in myself again, in a future I thought was gone forever." I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. "I'm so glad, Mitch. That's why I do this, to help people reclaim their lives." "I know," he said softly. "And that's why I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I stood there, frozen, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Shock, confusion, and underneath it all, a tiny spark of something I wasn't ready to name. "Mitch," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I I don't know what to say. I have a boyfriend, and you're my patient. It wouldn't be right." He nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I know. I didn't expect anything. I just, I needed you to know how much you've changed my life. How much you mean to me." As I watched Mitch drive away, my mind was reeling. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't felt a connection with him over the past months. But I'd attributed it to the intensity of the rehabilitation process, the bond that naturally forms between therapist and patient. Now, I was forced to confront the possibility that it might be something more. I'd been too busy, too focused on my work to really address the growing distance between us. And now, with Mitch's confession, I was forced to confront the hard truths I'd been avoiding. The next morning, I called Mark. Our conversation was long and painful, but ultimately necessary. We both admitted that our relationship had run its course. We'd grown in different directions, our dreams no longer aligned. It hurt, but there was also a sense of relief in finally acknowledging what we'd both known for a while. As I threw myself back into my work, I tried to push thoughts of Mitch to the back of my mind. He was no longer my patient, having graduated from his treatment plan, but the ethical implications of starting a relationship with a former patient still weighed heavily on me. Weeks passed, and life in Elmwood settled into a new rhythm. The rehabilitation center continued to thrive, and I found myself busier than ever. But there was a restlessness growing inside me, a sense that something was missing. It all came to a head one stormy evening in late November. I was working late again, catching up on paperwork, when a knock at the door startled me. I looked up to see Mitch standing there, soaked to the bone and looking utterly lost. "Mitch?" I said, jumping up to grab a towel from the supply closet. "What on earth are you doing out in this weather?" He accepted the towel gratefully, running it over his dripping hair. "I'm sorry to barge in like this. I needed to see you." I felt my heart rate quicken. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Mitch took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that took my breath away. "I know you said it wouldn't be right, us being together, and I respected that. I tried to move on, to forget about these feelings. But I can't, Allison. I can't stop thinking about you." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand, silently asking me to let him finish. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just need to know if there's even a chance. Because if there is, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be ready." In that moment, looking at Mitch, this man who had fought so hard to reclaim his life, who had shown me the true impact of my work, I felt something shift inside me. All the doubts and fears that had been holding me back seemed to melt away. "Mitch," I said softly, taking a step towards him. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't have feelings for you too. But it's complicated. There are ethical considerations, not to mention what people in town might say." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I understand, but Allison, nothing worth having ever comes easy. I think what we could have together is worth fighting for. If you're willing to try. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I thought about all the changes I'd been through since moving back to Elmwood, how I'd rediscovered my purpose, pushed myself to grow both personally and professionally. And I realized that maybe it was time to take one more leap of faith. Okay, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Let's try. The next few months were a whirlwind. Mitch and I took things slow, mindful of the unique circumstances of our relationship. We faced our fair share of raised eyebrows and wagging tongues in town, but as people saw how happy we were together, the gossip gradually died down. My practice continued to flourish, with patients coming from all over the county to seek treatment. I even started offering workshops for other physical therapists, sharing the holistic approach that had proven so successful. As spring bloomed across Elmwood, bringing new life and new beginnings, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. I'd come back to my hometown hoping to make a difference, to heal bodies and change lives. What I hadn't expected was how much I would be changed in the process. One sunny afternoon, Mitch and I were taking a walk through the town square, hand in hand. We passed by the rehabilitation center, and I paused, looking up at the sign that had once seemed so daunting. "What are you thinking?" Mitch asked, squeezing my hand gently. I smiled, leaning into him. I'm thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come from taking risks. From being willing to fail, to get hurt, but trying anyway. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. Sounds like someone I know. A stubborn, brilliant woman who taught me that very lesson. As we continued our walk, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. My life in Elmwood wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, goals to achieve, growth to be had. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had come home to heal others, but in the process, I had found my own healing. And with Mitch by my side and a community that had embraced me, I was excited to see what the future would bring. The Rehabilitation Center stood as a testament to second chances and new beginnings. It was a place where broken bodies found strength, where shattered dreams were rebuilt, and where hope bloomed even in the darkest times. As I looked ahead to the next chapter of my life in Elmwood, I knew that whatever challenges came my way, I had the strength, the support, and the love to face them head on. After all, that's what healing is all about. Not just mending what's broken, but emerging stronger, more whole, and ready to embrace all the possibilities that life has to offer. And in this small Texas town, with its big hearts and even bigger dreams, I had found more than just a career. I had found my true calling, my home, and a love that had healed my own heart in ways I never thought possible. If you enjoy heartwarming, inspirational Southern stories, then pick up a copy of Ernest Dempsey's latest novel, The Final Round, through the link in the description. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Magnolia Crossing when they're uploaded. Thanks for watching.